course, we get hints about crime, at any rate, from the press. The Canadian Press of December 24th, 2005. I quote, "Almost 100 men in rival Indo-Canadian gangs in Vancouver have been murdered since 1994, often execution style, over drug deals gone wrong. Toronto's gang violence, on the other hand, often involves gun-wielding young black men. Of the more than 70 murders in the Toronto area so far this year, as many as 30 were in the black community, and many others among Asians, Latino, and Tamil gangs," said Tony War, Toronto's deputy police chief. Here's Globe and Mail of October 17th, 2005, telling you that on a per capita basis, Winnipeg has become the murder capital of Canada. Once again, I quote, "Most of the victims of violent crime are Aboriginals, third world immigrants, gang members, homeless people, or transients. And Winnipeg's West End has long been in thrall to a gang known as the Mad Cows, made up mostly of young African immigrants." Here's the Vancouver paper, The Province, October 21st, 2005. They say, "A violent ethnic war between Filipino and Vietnamese youths in the Lower Mainland will likely escalate." Then, March 16, 2006, the Calgary Sun. Headline is, "Feared Gang Hits Calgary." Are we talking about dangerous white people here? No. It's a gang from Central America, El Salvador, called MS-13, More Racial Diversity. In 2005, black violence in Toronto got so bad that one city councilman, Michael Thompson, said police should pull over black people absolutely at random and search them for weapons. Racial profiling 100%. Was he hounded out of polite society? Well, no. He has protective coloring. He's black, you see. But he had perhaps an insider's view as to what the problem might be. Now, I will tell you, the United States is not too squeamish to collect statistics on race. And we know that when it comes to violent crime, blacks commit them at 10 to 15 times the white rate. Hispanics commit violent crime at 3 to 4 times the white rate. I suspect that you would have differentials equal to that here in Canada, but apparently you don't want to know. Now, we find a particularly fascinating diversity issue in the case of Toronto's now defunct zero-tolerance policy. Apparently, students in Toronto schools were committing so much robbery, drug dealing, sexual assault, weapons violations, that in 2000, the province passed the Safe Schools Act, requiring that any student who committed these crimes be either expelled or suspended. Well, just 4 years later, this policy had to be junked. Why? Because non-whites, in particular blacks, were being expelled and suspended way out of proportion to their numbers. Now, this story eliminates two things. First, we learn that the problem was largely non-whites. It was they who were being suspended and expelled. Second, a sensible, non-discriminatory policy had to be junked because non-whites were affected disproportionately. So here we have a situation in which racial diversity both caused the problem and made it impossible to implement a sensible solution. And while we're on the subject of Toronto schools, in 2005, a black school board member, Lloyd McKell, proposed that it might be necessary to set up all black schools because integrated schools were failing blacks. Too many dropouts, too many expulsions. And just last April, right here in Halifax, a black educator named Wade Smith recommended the same thing. Integrated schools are doing such a poor job for blacks that he wanted a school just for blacks. Now, I thought that segregation was bad for blacks. Now, apparently, black people are telling us integration is bad for blacks. It certainly sounds as though racial diversity is a mighty tricky business. Back to Toronto. In 2005, a coalition of 22 black community groups, well, hold on, let's stop right there. A coalition of 22 black community groups? What do all these groups do? Why do they need to be 22 of them? Why are they all exclusively black? Do their members all sit around and celebrate the strengths of diversity? I suspect not. But let's continue with this story. A Toronto coalition of 22 black community groups, disgusted by gun murders in the city, wants a separate set of rules and institutions for blacks. This is from the Toronto Sun. Separate rules and institutions. A whole coalition of 22 groups. The article continues. Margaret Parsons, executive director of the African Canadian Legal Clinic, says, Canada's vaunted policy of multiculturalism has blinded authorities to systemic racism against blacks, even as they adopt policies of inclusion and integration. Now, the poor, bloody white man just can't get it right, can he? Here he is adopting policies of inclusion and integration, but all that does is blind him to systemic racism against blacks. And I am still supposed to believe that racial diversity is a strength. Of course, now you have a problem with Muslims. Just last summer, police arrested a group that were planning to storm the Parliament building, hold parliamentarians hostage, perhaps even behead the Prime Minister. More strength, I suppose. But on a somewhat lighter note, Toronto's Muslims take their children out of classes that are designed to give them the right attitude towards homosexuals so frequently that the Toronto Prime Minister had to get involved. Dalton McGuinty himself had to beg Muslims to let their children take these classes. Well, diversity is a mighty tricky business. Then there's Canada's oldest experiment in racial diversity. That is to say, relations between whites and Aboriginals. Now, this must be a very strong relationship indeed, because it goes back the farthest. And if diversity is strength, this would be mighty, mighty strong. Well, it was even used in America when Indians took over the town of Caledonia, Ontario, and chased out all the white people. Now, Maclean's magazine warns of more in an article of December 27th of 2006. They say, quote, Canada should brace for more dramatic displays of Aboriginal defiance in 2007, warn Native leaders, who say that the First Nations frustration that boiled over in a small Ontario town this year may well be the tipping point for decades of simmering Aboriginal anger. Simmering Aboriginal anger, decades of it. I guess it must be another strength that somehow went wrong. On the very day of the Maclean's article, you know what the Mohawk Nation News says? I don't suspect you read that too often, but what they said was, quote, I'll quote again, don't get any ideas that we'll become Canadians. No way. We can and will handle our own affairs, so get out of our way while the going is good. Canada, you know, everything belongs to us, and we're getting it all back. Ladies and gentlemen, let's face the facts squarely. Racial diversity in Canada, just as it is in the United States, is an ordeal. If it were a strength, non-whites wouldn't set up countless groups to promote their interests. If it were a strength, no one would need diversity managers, sensitivity training. If it were a strength, you wouldn't need commissions, tribunals, councils to solve the problems it creates. And just take a look around the world. Wherever people are killing each other most diligently, they're killing each other because of diversity. Whether it's religion, race, language, that is why people are at each other's throats. The Soviet Union broke up because of race and ethnicity. So did Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. Zimbabwe is expelling white farmers only because they're white. Now, diversity, therefore, of the kind that Canada is promoting is one of the most obviously divisive forces on the planet. How anyone can consider it a strength, I don't know. But my 20 minutes are up, so I guess we will now find out from Professor March.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Mr. March.
Yes, well, I suppose we should begin by clarifying the concept of racially diverse. When Canadians say that they aim to have a racially diverse society, the emphasis isn't actually on the racial. It's diverse and it's society. So when we say that we value a racially diverse society, we're saying that we value the possibility of different kinds of people living together peacefully. Different kinds of people profiting from each other's differences. We have a whole variety of different kinds of people in Canada. They're here. The racial diversity is a reality. Our aim when we say we want a racially diverse society is, of course, we mean by society the peaceful and profitable interaction between peoples who are racially diverse. Now, there is another advantage. Just as Jared says, all around the world, racism burns strong, and it is a great thing if we can prove that it's possible for the different races to live together peacefully in Canada. If we did that, we would be mighty proud.